Enjoy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? What did you talk about at lunchtime? Food. It's a good topic. So I just came at the tail end of the last few talks, and I've been asked to talk a bit about what you do, what you really do, I hope, which is figure out strategy and figure out what's next. And you're all experts in a subject I'm not an expert at. So I'm going to try and share with you some thoughts about thinking about strategy and getting things to happen. I've just flown back last night and picked up the Business Day this morning. And on the front page is a quote by Alan Pullinger of FNB. Does anyone have time to see the headline this morning? He was saying 5 years of zero growth. So that's enough to bugger up your breakfast. I think I agree with that. I think we're in a structural phase where some regions, geographic regions, and some industries, and obviously some companies will do better than others, but generally we are going to really have to think about frugality and change at the same time. We're going to have to move much, much faster, and we're going to have to be much shrewder with the kind of insights we bring to where you're making value or destroying value. And we're going to have to do it at one hell of a pace. I often at Gibbs ask executives I work with there, how many routes you drive on in a typical week? And, well, let me ask it this way. How many of you drive to work and home the same way most of the time? Hands up. Fantastic. Do you ever wake up when you get to work? So, you know, what I do is I get them to map out the 5 most common routes they take. You know, home to gym or gym to work or family, parents or whatever it is, chommies. And it's amazing. We spend 80% of our time driving on about 5 routes. And the point about asking if we ever wake up when we get to work is if you do the same thing over and over, you actually stop thinking about what you're doing. As someone once said, if you're a hammer, everything will look like a nail. Or Alice in Wonderland, that other well-known strategy expert, if you're not careful, you'll end up where you're headed. So I'm very intrigued, and I'm going to try and approach this talk from a sort of a strategic perspective about how you might be thinking about strategy. Strategy, of course, has become this huge buzzword. For every writer, there's another definition. But it's basically, what will you do next? What will you do next? And many of us as executives feel we are constrained either by the environment or by our organization. And therefore, we are the victims of fate. Or we feel we're able to find a way through this organization and the environment, and therefore we have choice. And so I'd like you to reflect a minute to your neighbor verbally. What do you think the balance is in your leadership role? Is it fate or choice? Have a go. That's me done. I'm finished. It's all over. Have a go. 60 seconds. Fate or choice? What's the balance? If you're sitting alone, find a friend. Turn around, adopt a friend. Fate or choice? So I'm not going to ask you to answer it, but here's a few things I've learned over the years. Leaders need a map and a mirror. A map and a mirror. Now, maps are pretty obvious, right? We have maps because we want to know where we are, really. And we want to know maybe how we got there. And then, of course, most of us have some destinations in mind, depending on whether you are a planner or not. And, of course, the map's purpose is to give the information you need to make the journey. I'm astonished how few people, in fact, have a map of next. And I was intrigued by the budgeting program, the presentation, because I remember that sort of thinking 30, 40 years ago of the planning methodology. And that's why the tools you've got now might change, but there's something about them that worries me. It worries me in the sense that, having watched for many years around the world which companies really do well, or how the environment's changing, most of it's unexpected. Most of it depends on either our ability to impose our will on the world. So the word we use is to be proactive. I always think of De Beers, probably, one of the great stories in business all over the world. 150 years of dominating a sector based on hope. That's meant to be a joke. Where they persuade millions of couples to invest in a ring. There we go. And they have controlled it. I mean, can you think of any other brand for 150 years? It's astonishing. So they imposed their will on the world. I'll just give you one data point. In 1980, 5% of Japanese couples bought an engagement ring. It just wasn't simply part of the Japanese marriage process culture. Today it's 90%. And in the boom years of Japan, in the 70s and 80s, they just managed to persuade young couples to make this investment. So strategy is about imposing your will on the world. This building and complex we're in at Gibbs, the very first month we opened in 2000, I invited Jeremy Ord to come, and he gave a talk on data, and the share price was 70 Rand a share, and he was the Helen because it wasn't 130. And then about 3 years later, it was 5. Life is uncertain. Eat dessert first. So that's proactive. Proactive is the Elon Musk moving the auto industry from Detroit to California in 10 years. Proactive is Johannesburg, which is a farming region on a rand, the Witwatersrand, when an Australian, we believe, it's a sad part of the story, discovers the gold, and the next thing is, from 1886, by 1892, just 6 years later, Johannesburg has overtaken Cape Town, and they've never really recovered. It happened in the blink of the Buddha's eye. I'm not going to talk about the virus because I've been in London. That's what everybody, that's all they're talking about. They're inventing new mating and greeting rituals to try and stop the spread. But you can impose your will on the world. So think about that. As you think about your business's strategy and your role in the business, are you imposing your will on the world? The second option is to react to the world fast and efficiently. It's really the Japanese business strategy in the 70s. They drew on the American ideas of quality and mass production. You will know the Toyota story. And they managed to copy them highly efficiently and then make better cars than the Americans. The reactive model of strategy. We first have to look and see what everyone else is doing. We have to try and see what the explicit needs of markets are, and then we'll formulate an approach that will meet those needs. And then, of course, there's the third option, which is non-active strategy. We're too busy to have a strategy. We're working so hard. I call this the Stutterfords problem. Do you remember them? When I was a youngster, their head office, their main stores were in Adderley Street and in West Street and Russock Street here. They had these big department stores. You had a thing called an account. And you got a weird thing. If you went there, you got a weird thing that none of us remember called service. And Raymond Ackerman came along, and he'd gone to Seattle, funnily enough, and he photocopied them all, and he came back, and the rest, as they say, is history. Because Stutterford simply could not find a way to respond. They were so deeply locked. See, this is what I'm thinking about all the time now. How I've got in the room and what I'm doing in the room is not how I'm going to get out of the room. Now, if you take that on board this afternoon, because I'm going to talk about your time, where to spend your time. If you can take that simple thought and sort of cycle back a little in your life and think about what shaped you. your intellectual habits, your working habits, your allocation of time, the skills you're building, the things you're changing about the skills you have had up to now. Because I'm going to argue in a Darwinian sense. You remember Charles Darwin, the survival of the fittest. It's your rate of learning must be faster than the rate of change. When I was a youngster, my mother used to shop at Ackerman's, but we went for tea at Stutterford's. It was called upward mobility. And I used to run occasionally up the down escalator. I don't know, did any of you do that? Any hands up from the East Rand? Okay, we got you. Any of you still doing it? So, you know, if you're running up, if your organization is dealing with the forces of change, I'm not talking about technology, just the broad forces of change that are happening in our society, then you face these three clock speeds. The clock speed, the best clock speed, of course, is you change faster than the world around you. You go up the escalator, you get to the toy department. The second option is you put in your 70 hours a week, but you're actually not going anywhere because you're going at the pace of change. From Alice in Wonderland, it's called the Red Queen effect. Alice is running next to the Red Queen, and they're going nowhere, and Alice says to the Red Queen, but why aren't we going anywhere? And she says back to Alice, in your country, do you actually go somewhere when you run? South Africa's caught mainly, I think, in a reactive mode. We're far away, we're slow to learn, we're slow to make decisions. I think we're losing the game, but we'll come back to that. And then the third option is just I'm too busy to worry about any of this. I'm doing my job, I'm in my silo, I've got my parking bay, you know, I still get to work on time, life's pretty good. It's a naive assumption. My theory, which I think would be shared by most of you. Well, we know this. It's not a theory, we know this. Humans have never changed this fast. I don't know what the content is of what you painted this morning, Nick, but you know, we could spend some time on it, but we don't have time. That the speed, Alvin Toffler got it right. If you've never read Future Shock, go and read the first 50 pages of Future Shock, written in 1979, saying that speed will happen so fast, individuals, organizations, and societies mainly won't be able to handle it. So who can handle this change? I then want to give another angle to this and say, resilience. How tough are you? Are you going to fight? Are you ready to fight? I think South Africans are hoping something will happen. Cyril will arrive at 3 o'clock. This is the most naive assumption in a country, that someone else will fix it. Actually, no, it's us. It's you. And are you tough enough to take on this next agenda? Because the data is telling us clearly, I'm sure we all agree, if there's zero growth according to the top banker in the country in the next 5 years, and 1 million kids will leave high school every year, I mean, what on earth do you think this environment's going to look like in 5 years' time? Even the big projects, investment projects I'm working with in domestic investment, it'll take 5 years to create the kind of jobs we have in mind. That's if the government acts now, which is a reasonably unlikely proposition. So I'm interested in that. I love that. You know, Americans aren't good at English, but they have one nice saying, you can't jump a chasm in 2 jumps. It's a crappy strategy. Chasms you do in 1. And I've never figured out the difference between that guy and the rest of them. And I love the looks like, Fred, what on earth do you think you're doing? It's a lovely picture. So where are you in that group? Because IT people often are, they're energetic, they're knowledgeable, but they're not mavericks. And they tend to see the world rationally, which is fabulous, because half of reality is rational, but the other half is inspirational and creative, and that's where the mirror comes in. When you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you say, why am I in the room? What's the answer? And I want to challenge you today in whatever way I can to say, leaders will look in the mirror and shape an answer as to why you're in the room. Why are you doing the job you're doing? Why are you working in the company you are? Because in times of hard, tough times, I'm predicting it's going to get much tougher. Your resilience, your courage, your self-confidence to say, I want to be in this room today, I don't mean at this conference. I want to do this thing. Let me just share one last thought about this. The only part of this country that's really functioning reasonably is business. It's a terrible thing to have to admit that the state is dysfunctional in so many strategic and operational ways. The SOEs are grinding the economy to a halt, as we all know. The private sector has the capacity to be the only stable long-term factor for the moment, but also the healing agent of transformation. And if we don't start buying into that as business people, that just looking after our returns and our corporate interests, it's an insufficient curriculum for the kind of time we're in. Because the structure of power around the world, but also in this country, is never going to let a narrow private sector carry on doing what it's doing. I don't think. I hope you agree with that. I urge you to think about this. Why are you in business? What got you there? And what were the assumptions when you entered a business career that are still valid today? And what are the new assumptions? Or are you here by accident? I was talking to an older group, a bit older than you, recently, who are all having erotic vision of Margates. They're all trying to get to Margates at 55. We're never going to retire. I was talking to two 70-year-olds over the weekend, and we were talking about why are we still working so hard. And this young guy, this very young guy of about 40, came running up to us and said, "You're working so hard because you're so old." It was brilliant, because what he meant, I think, or at least I think what he meant was to say, because we love what we do. Do you love what you do? Do you have a job? I can't think of anything more undermining of human dignity right this minute than having a job. Do you know what I mean by a job, emotionally? This country, we're not asking you to do a job. We're asking you to change the lives of millions of people throughout all the companies in this room. That's what I believe in. Modern life, wherever I go, when I go to Egypt, I was in Egypt a few weeks ago watching how Egyptian society functions, realizing that the Egyptian polity, the politics and the culture and the economy of Egypt has depended on one thing. What is it? It was a participative moment. But no. Begins with N, ends with E. The Nile. And for 5,000 years, the flooding of the Nile has brought the sediment and the water to allow this great civilization to build all its structures, its conquests, be attacked, be occupied for everyone from Napoleon to the Romans. It's no longer the Nile. They just didn't get that email. You ask yourself why in 1957, Ghana, which was the first decolonizing country in Africa, had a per capita income 5 times higher than South Korea. And today, South Koreans are 17 times better off than Ghanaians. It's because the Ghanaians never went to South Korea. We are not aware of how we are underperforming, I want to suggest to you. And this is not to kind of say this is the bad news. I'm saying that's the invite you've got to the next Olympics. And will you take it up, or are you just going to watch the movie and dream of Australia on Friday night? All right. I stepped down, as Tony said, from running Gibbs, which I had the privilege of starting with a blank sheet of paper in 2000, and I thought that was my sort of vision of myself. Tragically, I got that instead. And so I've had to change my swimming techniques to cope with that. So that's not me, but that's what we have to do. You have to get yourself mentally and physically and intellectually and emotionally ready for more challenges than we can think of right now. The unknown unknowns that we've talked about, they're coming soon to a theater near you. And it may not be Metro. Let me share that with you. That's a strategy picture. What are those? Yeah, I know the keys. Good one. What do they? How do they work? What do they do? So they're different kinds of keys, right? But the basic product design is the same. It's going to enter a lock. If it's the right key in the right lock, in other words, the right service in the right market, it can open the market, right? So now let's go to that. Yale. Do you remember Yale? We've all done this, right? Turn to your neighbor and explain exactly how it works. what happens? And don't say, I put the key and I turn it and it opens. I'm expecting a little more than that, especially in the cheap seats at the back there. Turn to your neighbor and explain as best you can, how does this actually happen? Go for it. Anybody brave enough to have a go? I heard an engineer the other day, and it was fabulous. He got it 98% right. Anybody? I've lost eye contact. Okay. So as you can see, there's a round tube in there that's got pins in it. And if the structure of the key matches the pins, then the pins turn and it opens the lock. I mean, it's not particularly hard. That's about as far as I've got. And then some bastard comes along and does that. It's really very annoying. And, you know, the Japanese say one nuclear bomb wrecks your whole afternoon. So you're a major key maker and some bastard does that. Now you've got to remember the numbers, learn to twiddle the thing. Remember, it's very annoying. And then about 10 years later, somebody does that. That's electromechanical, of course. That's the thumbprint guy. Very annoying. Entirely new technology. Everything you know, almost everything that Yale knows over 300 years they've built up is reduced to zero. In fact, your prior knowledge is worse than being reduced to zero. It becomes a major, begins with L, liability. How you've got in the room and what you're doing in the room is not how you're going to get out of them. All my professional academic life, I've argued with the finance people. Don't take this badly. We haven't a clue of the value of a company. It's been shown in the last 10 years over. We don't know what it's worth. You may be a bit young, but I remember we used to have a thing called goodwill. Goodwill was not the gardener. Goodwill was a thing on the balance sheet. It's those assets for which we couldn't account to balance the liabilities and the assets. Today, most of the value of our business is an intangible, and God knows how we're ever going to figure out what it's worth. The marketing guys, because they're great salespeople, they come along and tell you they know how to do it. They haven't a clue. We don't know the value of much, actually, in this technology, fast-moving, intangible world. We just haven't caught up intellectually with the nature of the battle. And then, of course, it goes one step further, which I just love that. Another revolution. So if you go back quickly, you realize that in a space of a few short years, the scale of the revolution is so profound. And this is, I think, the fabulous societal, economic, political, technological, scientific, and global world you are in. You are living in the fastest change in human history. And the point of the mirror is, how do you have that conversation with yourself? How do you think you learn? I've been lecturing for 40 years. I know that lecturing, I used to go to some of my undergrad lectures, and it was the process in high school, was the process of the notes of the teacher becoming the notes of the student without going to the brains of either. Do you remember those days? You sat in a big hall and you made notes. How do you learn? What I've learned about learning at your level of seniority is you learn by experiencing new things. And this is why I want to talk about your time allocation. What are you studying at the moment? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And how much room have you got to define what it is you're really trying to do? And how big is it? How big is it? And what I mean by that is, are you spending your time making little decisions all the time that aren't really life-changing for you or the organization? Because strategy is about the direction of next that is life-changing for the market you serve, as well as for your business. We're not thinking like that. On Thursday night, I've got to give a talk about economic history, and if you look at Joburg becoming this mining center, the biggest and most sophisticated economy in Africa by far, in the space of 20 years, that this economy, Gauteng is 3%. Think about this. Think about this if you're sitting in, I don't know, the Northern Cape. Gauteng is 3% of the land mass of South Africa. It's 40% of the GDP. Sandton, I've traveled all over this continent. Sandton is unique. There's nothing like Sandton on the continent. it's maybe 10 square kilometers. You are sitting in the center of the center of the center of the African economy. And just think about 1 billion people north of us. And think about the 20 million South Africans we've left behind, living on a grant. And think about the capabilities we've got. You know, many of you may have shares in SAB Miller, but most of you have been active supporters. We took a monopoly and made it the second biggest beer maker in the world. All this latent potential is sleeping because the state's not getting it right. We aren't investing in the infrastructure. We aren't building new institutions. We're not even running very effectively the old institutions. Our institutions are being degraded by bad leadership. You have to stand for great leadership, not management. Management's easy. Management we can teach. Leadership is a self-inspired form of work that is based on an idea of what is next, that you are ruthlessly determined to impose on the world. Does that sound like Billy Graham? I hope not. I got taught this stuff, you know, accounting and operations management, because this is a fabulous thing. This is strategy, right? Two nations fighting each other, kings and queens and bishops and knights and pawns, and it's very polite. You each take a turn, and you've got 64 blocks, and you've got millions of options, and eventually you've won when they say, checkmate. How's it, my China? Checkmate. I would listen to an 18-year-old a couple of years ago. He was speaking at a CEO conference just ahead of me, and I was very irritated because he was paid the same fee as me, and 18 years old, and he talked about this. Now, I've been showing this picture, and I ask people to guess, and what I often get, it's the EFF meeting the DA. That's one option. It's a religious convention. It's a sports game of some kind. Actually, it's the final of the World of Warcraft in Seoul a few years ago. And these are the commentators here, and these are the screens where they all pay $100 to go. Amongst them are 300 entertainers that go around the crowd dressed in these weird uniforms that are part of the game. What is this Fortnite? You know what I'm talking about. You guys have bad childhoods. You do all this stuff. And what's the difference between that and that? Right? This is logical. It's planning. You know, these grandmasters lose 4 kilos in 3 days because the brain uses 40% of our body's energy. And if you use it a lot, you lose a lot of weight. It's amazing. It's Mortal Kombat. There's one winner. Yeah, I can see a lot of people going, I must play chess to lose weight. No. What you got to do is play the next game and invent it. Because South Africa has, we're just talking about, South Africa's a frontier society. We don't know each other yet. We still have major distances between us. We're a country that was invaded and oppressed people and fought for its freedom and then amazingly won its freedom. And then, you know, I'm an old professor. I often leave my keys like, where the hell are my keys? You know, you can lose a country. It's very embarrassing. It's like, yo, where did I put it? Currently, we're losing this fight. So there we go. Play the next game. This is also from a famous American academic. You might remember him, Mike Tyson. That's how it works. And what I'm trying to say to you is that, as I said, how you've got to really understand how you learn. There's one thing I want you to take away from today. How do you learn? Go and think about it deeply. Ask people you love and care about. How do I learn? Think about what in this year are your learning experiments. How are you conducting yourself to learn and unlearn? The opposite of learning is unlearning. How are you going to abandon your habits, find new ways to work, not keep playing golf or whatever it is with the same people, talking about the same stuff for 20 years and hugging your creepy crawly, hoping no one will take it away? It's a losing invitation. You know, Johannesburg's become like Jericho. It's a walled city. If someone plays a trumpet at the right note, the whole thing will go. We've got to build something else, and you can't do that unless there's social capital, unless we know each other, like each other, and need each other. And the moment that discourse is not working here, We argumentative. We're talking mainly about the past. We're irritated with each other. We haven't found the kind of amazing moments that Sia found in November, that amazing day. And that's the thing that's so tantalizing about South Africa. Zimbabwe will not come right in my lifetime. And I intend to live at least another 3 months. It will not, because it's deeply structural. It's systemic. And there's now a culture of the way life works that I see deeply embedded in Zimbabwe. We have to avoid that. And we have much less time than we think. Now is the time to really do things differently. So think about how you learn and how do you unlearn. And here's what I've discovered about it. It's go and experience things that you don't know. You know, many years ago, I used to be invited by all the HR people to all their conferences because they were all so mournful. You know, they're like ex-teachers now doing HR. Why don't the bosses listen to us? Because you know nothing about business. You've got to get outside the organization. You've got to live in the market. You've got to live in the joy of use of the product or service. It's not rational. You're very rational because you like engineers. This thing is not rational. This thing is super beyond rational. That's not to say the rational part doesn't work. Of course it does. Data analytics and AI and all these amazing technologies are actually the creatures of great imagination. We can't just be their users. We have to really understand how this thing works. The first business book I ever read was about barter shoes. You've all heard of barter shoes. So they send their sales guy to Ghana, and he goes around Ghana for 6 weeks trying to measure the potential for barter shoes. And he writes up this long report at the end. He says there's no potential for shoes in Ghana. 90% of people don't wear them. And then the opposition come, they go the same route, 6 weeks, writes a report. There's a fantastic potential for shoes in Ghana. 90% of people don't wear them. By 2013, there were 4 billion cell phones on the planet. Think about that. This is still at its infancy. It's just fantastic. So then versus now and then next. And the known knowns, what are you working on this year? What are the 3 things that matter? Not the 40-item to-do list that we all have to run each day with, but the 3 things that you are trying to do this year. What are they? Because we'll suck you dry with a to-do list until you don't know if it's Tuesday or Belgium. Be in charge of your own to-do list, but ask yourself, is it strategic? Because I'm talking about time in a minute. The second is the known unknowns. We know what the issue is, we just don't know what its impact is, the virus. And then there's what I heard referred to earlier, the unknown unknowns. Who of us would have thought we'd be talking about the virus? I want to share this with you. I'm going to speed up now because I'm going to be short of time. This is what I would advise you, because it's going to be very tough and it's going to change very quickly, and you're either going to be a victim of the change or you're going to make the change. So in your time allocation, think of those 3. First, start with find time to do the unplanned. Now, many people think it's surprising I would put that at the top, but every organization I've led, something's going to happen that's not in the budget, if you know what I mean. Some bastard's going to interrupt your day. And right now, everyone's talking about, this damn thing that's going on. Look at yourself and your time and your knowledge and think about, how do I make room for the unplanned? And I've only got one major tip for you because we're going to be short of time, is stop doing what you're doing and delegate more of it. South Africans, all our research shows, we love control. We don't want to let go. Now, don't let go to mukhus, because they'll crash the aeroplane. Right? This doesn't happen easily. But let go. It's like that guy was cleaning the building in New York on the 78th floor on the outside of the building, washing the windows, and he slipped and he fell. He grabbed the ledge. He was hanging on to the ledge and looked down. The cars were about that big. Help, help, nothing happened. Help, help, nothing happened. Arms are shaking, thinking about insurance, and his wife, help, help. And he said, oh, God, is anyone knowing? God, help me. And this voice came out. Do you believe? He said, I believe. Let go. Is there anyone else up there? unplanned leadership. Find the capacity and go and network differently. Stop talking to the same people. Sell off the kids. They're just an overhead. I mean, you don't really need them. Think about your relationships and think about who you'd like to know that you don't. Kinds of people, attitudes that you may not be familiar with, cultures you may not be familiar with, parts of the organization you know less than you should, because to lead you've got to understand the whole damn thing. And the whole damn thing takes effort to get out of your mode, get out of your function, get out of your role. Because to lead, you've got to get out of your role. So think about those. Responsive leadership means shrewdly making the decisions about the things that matter, that are visible. So it's a kind of an operational leadership. People used to ask me why I'd walk around the campus so much and pick up papers, and if there's no toilet paper, I'd get terribly upset, and if we didn't start exactly on time, I'd get the hell in. They'd say, but what, you're obsessive. I'd say, no, I'm obsessive about the few things that really matter, because if we don't do those 5 things well, it's no good having a strategy, right? So be operational, but don't just be operational, because you've got to do this other role. And then the last one is, what's your vision? What are the ideas you've got shared amongst yourselves, and to work on them? I'm going to leave that. Here's the fundamental strategy question that I urge you to take to your excos and raise. It's very simple. It's got 3 elements. What can you do that the market wants insight, or will want foresight, that the other bastards can't do? That's the heart of strategy. And you must be smarter than your lunch. That's one of nature's laws, or you're going to be the lunch. So I think South Africa is under-competitive. We don't understand the scale and speed of how countries like us are moving, and they're going to leave us in the dust if we don't move faster. And I wish we had time. I would spend time on why we don't move faster. But that's a question you might find useful to explore with your team. I'm going to skip that. These are the 4 pots of making things happen. They're very simple, right? What the hell is going on? How much time do you spend outside the organization trying to understand it from a customer or competitor's point of view as to what's actually going on? This is not data. This is where data is very misleading. This is feel. This is intuition. This is experience. This is the smell of the thing. What's going on? What are we going to do about it? Obviously, the strategy, the plan, what's next? How are we going to do it? How are we going to restructure? Most of our companies are still functionally structured. In a network world, we're functionally structured. Are we nuts? We've got structures that belong in the last century. I go to Google in London. They don't have the structures we have. They walk about 3 times faster than we do. Average age at Google London is about 28, and those are the old ones. We are really an aging economy with poor infrastructure in old and traditional industries, and with a few islands that are absolutely incredible. And then who's going to do this? My daughter was asking me a year ago, what should I do in my job, Dad? I'm not liking my job. I said, are you volunteering for everything? She said, what do you mean? I said, volunteer. When they ask who will do this, put your hand up every time. You'll fly through the organization. Put the time in. I still meet people who are working 40, 50 hours a week. Are you mad? 40, 50 hours a week. You're going to get nothing done if you don't work 70 hours a week. Nothing. You're going to have to work till you're 70 anyway. Have you got that email? Right? You're going to live till you're 90, big market for skin cream. You're going to work till you're 70. There's no retiring from a job. You die. I've checked this out. All my mates. This Friday I'm going to my high school's 50th reunion. They're all popping off because they retired. Futsak, Wena. Don't go there. You've got to work 70. I once, when I was at Rhodes, we went for, a mate of mine said, we're having a drink with a guy who's starting a business. We had a couple of beers. I mainly went because it was free beer. And about 15 years later, I said to him, do you remember that discussion? He said, yes. I said, is my memory right? Is this what he said? He said, I said, did he talk about exponential time? He said, yes. What he said was, if you work 3 hours a day longer than everybody else, like compound interest, over 20 years, you will know one hell of a lot more than everybody else. His name was Alan Gray. Who's going to do it? This is a big South African thing. We moors are busy, but bugger all's happening. It's lovely English. Action is, you feel comfortable. I put in lots of hours. I've got a sore head on Friday. I'm ready to boogie or play golf. But it's the enemy of thought and the friend of flattering illusions. I'm almost done. This is a stunning piece of data. This is looking at 500 wars over about, 200 years. And I'll summarize it very quickly. This is, to qualify to be in this group, you had to be 5 times bigger than that group, right? And so in 1800 to 1849, 88% of the time, the guy 5 times bigger than the other group won. And look what happens. The little guys win. That's why I'm so short. It's a fabulous advantage. The ankle biters win. The mavericks win. The gap spotters win because they're unconventional. They're not slumbering in a big machine where nothing's happening. I had one of those jobs once. I worked for a big mining company. And one Monday morning at 10 o'clock, I found myself in a cinema with all your sales reps at 10 in the morning. Just once. I left the company a little after that. I moved to Seattle in 1983 to do my doctorate. And 4 years before I got there, that was the sign on the freeway. It was all over. They'd produced timber, they had Boeing, they had Weyerhaeuser, and that was the slogan. A real estate guy paid for that board. Now, you know what happened to it in the 80s and 90s. They totally turned it around. Totally. I was back there the other day. I mean, it's just on Amazon, all the Microsoft. These companies changed the destiny of that city and made it one of the most livable cities in America. How did that happen? That's what we are after. We have to save this country. This is not like being in business in Belgium. We don't care what happens in Belgium. They've got Waterloo and pamphlets. That's their problem. We've got a hell of a job to do here, and I think the time is round about now. Let me end by talking about teams. So there are teams. That's a team. It's a Botswana team. It's a fabulous team. Can you see the 5 bits of information? Share them with your neighbor. What 5 bits of information are in that picture? Have a go. Okay, any thoughts? I'm going to start with that lady at the back. She's on her phone now. She did have a camera. Yep, that's you, madam. You've gone squint. Maybe you hearing challenge. That's you, yes? Ah. Give us one piece of information. Which is? 5 lionesses. Otherwise known as 6. I can see your visual problem, madam. Yes, sir. Go, go, go. The what? 7 lions. You also need to meet with her to try and sort out your visual problem. Yes, sir. They're all female. Yeah. They do the work if you study lions. Yes, sir. They're moving. What do you think they're looking at? Lunch. Lunch. Except this one who spotted the cameraman. It's like, oh, shit. They're a team, right? Look at the communication in that team. And look at the role definition. These are the 2 leaders, right? There's the flanks, there's the reserve, and there's the training program. Pretty damn good. What we don't want is that. Thanks very much for inviting me, guys. I really wish you well. I've been meeting with Nick from time to time. I've known Tony for many years. What a remarkable thing you guys have done in building the business, those of you who work for Decision Inc. And I'm really delighted you invited me and to spend this time with you. Thanks again. Cool.